Welcome back to Giant Talk, the world's first OKR podcast. Today, Giant Talk is delighted to be joined by David Ciccarelli, CEO and founder of Voices, one of the biggest online marketplaces for voiceovers. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of strategic alignment and the process that Voices goes through in their strategic planning process. So welcome to Giant Talk, David. I'm delighted to have you with us for today's episode.
Charlie, great to be here.
Thank you. Please, can you tell our listeners, before we get into the conversation, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Happy to do so, and I'll certainly keep it brief. Growing up, I was always fascinated with sound, and so when I, graduated from high school, I actually wanted to pursue a career in music or audio production. So I went to a specialized school learning how to record and mix and produce music and audio of all kinds, and then opened up a small recording studio that actually got my name in the local newspaper on my birthday of all days. And that's how I met Stephanie. And Stephanie's my wife and co-founder in the company that we now run, Voices.com. She was a classically trained singer, and she'd sing at weddings and funerals and special events. And I was the engineer. And so we started working together initially to record her singing repertoire. But because of that same newspaper article, and it shows you the power of local publicity, that I was able to attract other small businesses that wanted a female voice to record some commercials. So knowing one young lady in the city, that was Stephanie, I asked her to come back down to the studio. I'll be the engineer and she'll be the voice talent. And we'll split the money 50-50. So that's how we ended up working together. We soon created a website that promoted Stephanie and that actually attracted other freelance voice talent, people who spoke different languages from different parts of the world, who even had different accents. And at the same time, clients would say, how do we get in touch with these people? I see their name, I can listen to a sample of their voice. And that was the entrepreneurial aha moment. Wow, what if we get out of the recording studio business ourselves and instead pivot and run this online marketplace? Let's facilitate these transactions between buyer and seller, between that client who's looking to tell their story and the freelance voice talent who's got a great voice and is looking for work to pursue a career. And so that's what we've been doing for almost the better part of 15 plus years. And it's been quite an amazing journey along the way.
Thank you, David. It's really interesting to hear how Voices was started. I think it's a really nice story. And I think for anyone out there listening to Giant Talk on this episode that has been involved in sort of video production and listened to and looked for a voiceover, I think it's amazing now the amount of different voiceovers available, and you can actually ask for and search for a completely certain accent from places all around the globe. So I think to fit your target audience, I think that's really interesting.
I love that you said target audience, Carly, because what we found is that clients, and as you said, video producers mostly, want to hire somebody who sounds like the people they're trying to reach.
Yeah.
So if it is from a certain, ethnicity, a certain, region of the world, maybe somebody who's familiar with the terminology and it sounds very natural, that's the kind of person that you want to hire. Age demographic as well too. And so if you're trying to reach a more mature or even elderly or senior audience, then you should be hiring somebody to provide the voice, almost as that audio ambassador, right? They're kind of putting forth that important message on behalf of your organization. So I love that you brought up target audience, because that's what our research finds, and that we see it happening every day through the jobs that are posted on Voices.com.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we've been looking at most recently, and for a new video that we're launching at There Be Giants. So yeah, it's really interesting. So I want to start by getting into the conversation, and I'm going to start by asking you, by defining strategy, what exactly does that mean?
Well, for me, strategy has a very specific definition. I've had the great pleasure of pursuing continued education through an executive education program at Harvard Business School. And you can imagine that they're going to have a very academic definition of what strategy means. And so really what it is the integrated set of choices that a business makes to differentiate itself from its competitors to deliver long-term and superior results. So if I could break that down, the important part is the set of choices, because your everyday, I think I read somewhere online that the average adult makes upwards of 30,000 decisions every day, from what do I wear, what do I eat, what time do I get up in the morning, and then of course the more meaningful decisions as we face during our business day. And in our work context. So if strategy at a corporate level is the collective decisions that we're making, we also need to make sure that they are an integrated set of choices. They're self-reinforcing, if you will. We don't want decisions that lead one part of the organization into one direction, and then everyone's scratching their head going, why are they moving over there? And we're diverting resources. So as I say, we want these integrated set of choices and that differentiate yourself from the competitors. The set of choices that you need to be making should actually be different than what your competitors are doing. And everybody has competitors, whether they're direct competitors, whether they're adjacent, maybe it's another industry that might be veering into your space. It could even be the competitive tension sometimes you have with your suppliers or vendors that you work with. But the disruptive competitors would be those alternatives or substitutes that kind of come out of nowhere. Often, in copywriting, for example, there's a whole new wave of AI-based copywriting. I've seen these articles on The Guardian that's like, this article is, written by an AI. And you think, wow, really entirely? Perhaps there's a little light touch editing at the end, but the bulk of it was done by AI. And so that would be an alternative, as opposed to thinking that if we're a copywriting or a marketing firm, stock photography versus, professional custom photography. So there's a lot of parallels. So I would challenge those listening to think about who their competitors are. It's not just who does the exact same thing of you. It's actually more likely to be the disruptive ones coming from those alternatives. So the choices that you make need to be self-reinforcing and differentiate you from all those competitors that we just talked about.
Thank you for unpacking that and just explaining and getting us started in this conversation about what strategy actually means. You mentioned there integration, and I think that obviously sort of ties in with being aligned. So one thing that I just wanted to ask you, what would you say are the telltale signs that an organisation hasn't achieved strategic alignment?
Well, one of the things I've heard over the years, which perhaps is a reflection of an opportunity for my own improved communication. But if you ever hear people, especially those on your leadership or executive team, asking, what's our strategy? What's our strategy here? And I think that kind of questioning, do we even have one, implies that as a leader, maybe we haven't been clear about the direction of our company. What are those key choices that you're going to make? So in our business, just to give an example of what a key choice would be, and these kind of self-reinforcing choices, we choose to operate an online platform that is not mimicking the traditional business of a kind of a pipeline business model. So pipeline businesses are very linear, and platforms really are very flat and operate online. It's very free-flowing information. Pipelines, there's a lot of gatekeepers of information. It's linear in its flow. It's kind of a value chain. Each person kind of takes their piece of the pie. So that is a choice we're making. We're going to operate as a platform. Another business might say, well, maybe it's a restaurant. We're only going to operate within certain geographic boundaries. Maybe we're going to operate within a certain, hours of the day, or have certain items on our menu. So whatever these choices are, I think that needs to be communicated out, because that really is the basis of your strategy. So that's kind of a red flag that indicates really from the top down, there's either misalignment, there's disagreement, or uncertainty of kind of what are these big choices that we're making that ultimately drive the direction. And any of that, if it's happening on the executive team, you can be sure it's going to cascade down to the rest of the organization. So even if people aren't verbalizing it, maybe their actions are indicating that there isn't alignment. Just because someone doesn't talk about it doesn't mean there isn't an issue. It's probably maybe speaks to actually a bigger problem, Carly, where the team doesn't feel comfortable to ask these type of questions. But whether they're explicit about challenging, do we even have a strategy, or you're not hearing any discussion around strategy, I think those are a couple telltale signs that an organization hasn't yet achieved strategic alignment.
Yeah, I think this, like you said, there's some good, red flags there to spot whether or not you currently have strategic alignment. And I think it's important, communication. It's key. And as I think we'll talk a little bit later about, especially with organisations where not everyone is in the office altogether, and it's keeping that communication with remote teams or in a hybrid situation. Can you talk us through a little bit about the strategic planning process that you follow yourself at Voices?
Yeah, absolutely. Like most organizations, there's somewhat of a methodology, if you will, and this has been developed initially by an external consulting firm that was kind of brought into our organization. And the headline is there's 4 steps. The first one is learning, then thinking, then deciding, and then planning to act. And so just to unpack this one as well, if I may, I think will be really instructive for those listening. Learning really is going to happen, kind of what's happening out there in the industry, in the world. You're doing a current state assessment. Look at the previous year, and are we on track? Are we hitting our revenue numbers? Are we within our budget? So that's kind of learning from the internal view, but we also want to combine that with an external view. Maybe draw out some themes. What are the important changes that have happened in the world that might be impacting our business? So often an exercise in this would be the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But an alternative view of that, because SWOT is very much looking at your direct kind of competitors, and it's kind of your interaction with them. But the other one is the acronym is PESTLE, PESTLE. And this is political, environmental, social, technological. Maybe there's a legal environment, there's an economic environment. So you want to be considering all of these external forces that might have an impact on your business, and therefore, do you need to respond? So I think combining the internal view and doing all that assessment, everything from the customer satisfaction scores, your employee engagement surveys, and as well as the actual numbers of how you're performing, and then continuing that learning with, combining that with what's happening out there in the world. Somewhere along the way, you actually need to sketch out, even in rough form, the desired future state. And so again, having this in this learning phase, where is it that we want to be? Now, you might be starting to sketch out as well what some kind of future growth opportunities might look like. But I think that important phase, which might kind of take a couple weeks' time in just being in the learning, that's going to set you off on the right trajectory right from the get-go. So that's kind of step one. Then I would move into the thinking, which is answering the questions, well, what could we do in response to what's happening out there? You definitely want to solidify your vision and mission. We don't want to be changing these every year, but we also want to make sure that, people are nodding heads and in agreement that this is, again, the big kind of the what and the why we do what we do are still relevant. If there are big core objectives that are carried forward from last year, like core strategic objectives, those should also be, we want to think through those, and then perhaps start to think about quantifying those growth opportunities and initiatives. Are there any ones we want to carry forward, or are there other ones we want to consider and add? When adding, that's going to show up as an idea cloud, is what we call it. Basically, it's a brainstorming session. For us, we use a giant spreadsheet, and everyone contributes to it. Every leader has their own tab. Now, we don't spend a lot of time at this phase in the just kind of thinking, like kind of initial brainstorm in terms of doing a thorough business case or sizing it up. We actually just use a simple t-shirt sizing approach. So is this an extra large opportunity or is it an extra small opportunity? And that saves a lot of unnecessary cycles in terms of investigation and analysis, because why spend a lot of time on a handful of extra small opportunities that may not move the needle? So we just try to get it to that stage. And then just rounding this out briefly would be the deciding. Well, this kind of means that now we do get into the business case and further evaluate those growth opportunities. We want to lock them down, make those decisions together, and then start to introduce the questions around, are there any new organizational changes that need to happen in terms of organizational structure or org design, new roles entirely that need to be contemplated? And that then feeds into the planning to act. And really, this is, again, probably the budgeting cycle as well too. You making sure that we have a corporate scorecard, that we have at least some notion of. I mean, we do certainly button it up, but we want to make sure that we have those key performance indicators clear at that point. And then planning to act before the year begins. We do strategic plan preview. So those have been at Voices for a number of years. There's a lot of familiar, slides and content, and I think that's actually a good thing. It means we're not moving in a different direction every single year. So while there's some repeat themes, there's definitely some new initiatives. So we preview that in December and then do a bigger kickoff once our board has approved the budget and the strategic plan in January. So that's our process. Hopefully that, as I say, instructive and helpful to those listening.
Yeah, I think it's quite a succinct 4-step process. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into each step. I was nodding along when you mentioned the pestle and the SWOT. It takes me back to my marketing university days, and just knowing how important it is to look at, in the learning stage, what's happening out there. And I was thinking, when you were talking about that, whether or not the learning stage has maybe taken a little bit longer, given what's been happening over the past couple of years, and still happening. I know, obviously, things are changing all of the time. But yeah, I wondered whether has it changed how you've approached any of those stages over the past 2 years now?
I think it's actually a really good question around. Has the process is still intact, but you're absolutely right. I would say the learning phase is, it doesn't have to be a distinct, okay, we're going to learn about the market in these month or 2 months of the year. In fact, Peter Drucker, who's a management consultant and very kind of famous in management circles, if you will, wrote in probably the most prolific writer on the subject. He describes the role of the CEO is to bridge the outside world with the inside world. So to bridge what's happening out there in the economy, your market, your customers, what your board of directors are feeling, any other advisors or consultants, and then bringing that to the inside world, your employees, your team, the leadership team. And so as myself, as the CEO, I feel like I'm always learning. I'm myself listening to podcasts. I'm, reading, staying up to date on the latest news and technological innovations. And so whatever sources of information that you have, and you tend to kind of accumulate these and start to formulate what you view, develop a thesis, if you will, of what are the big changes that we need to, face or adapt to over the next year. So for me, you're absolutely right. It's been a more prolonged process. And then even during kind of when we, quote unquote, kick off strategic planning session and season, if you will, kind of during, April, May timeframe for the subsequent year. You're right. That has been a little bit longer of a process over the last couple of years, just because so much has been changing. Even something as straightforward as deciding, how much time in the field, either one-on-one with customers or attending events, how much time kind of outside the office are we going to be spending? And that's hard to decide at one moment in time if the policy and kind of changes country to country. So that's been an area where I think all organizations are just wise to stay nimble as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. And I think you've touched on it there, mentioning April and May when you start to look at the whole process. And my next thought was, how often do you go through this process? So I'm assuming it is a yearly process, and you're coming up to, I mean, we're middle of, well, I'm going to say middle of Feb now. You're starting to think about the planning process for the next year.
Yeah, well, you're right. We run this annually. And however, there's actually two processes that are running concurrently, and I think they're symbiotic. One is planning for the next year. As I said, kind of starting that in May. And we like to put the time in the calendar just to have that commitment where it's everyone knows that these are really kind of like half day sessions, if you will, and there's pre-work to be done ahead of time. So there's the planning for the next year, but let's not forget, remember, we did this last year as well too. So we also need to track the plan of our current year. And that's done on a monthly basis, looking at our numbers. Each quarter, we do a bit of a deeper dive for some of the key projects, like the bigger projects, key initiatives, and so forth. And then there's certainly kind of status check-ins that happen regularly throughout the year for the current year that you're in, that provides ample opportunity for that, which is the topic today, strategic, alignment, or maybe even realignment if necessary. Are we still tracking according to plan? Is this initiative that we were going to start halfway through the year, is this still relevant? I think it's okay to have those healthy discussions. So while it's annually, there's actually 2 years going on, the current year and the next year, that we need to be both be mindful of.
Yeah, no, of course, that makes sense. And do you use OKRs in the strategic planning process? And can you tell me a little bit about, if you do, how you use OKRs in the process?
Yeah, sure. We certainly do. I mean, the objectives themselves aren't, for us, necessarily going to change dramatically year to year. Our objectives, which we would kind of define through metrics, but would look like something like, financial performance growing at 30% year over year, and then breaking that down. And that financial performance might be revenue. There also might be a budget number. There might be a profitability metric as well too. So, but the key of the overarching objective there is to deliver financial performance according to the board approved plan. Now, I would caution against actually reinventing the objectives every single year, because you don't want to, kind of have this rip up the paper from the last year, start again. One, I think it's tremendously inefficient, and also, unfortunately, it can be disorienting to the rest of the organization. Even if you're in a small to medium sized business, 10 employees to 100 employees, I think it would be quite, to reuse the term, disorienting, and may cause further strategic misalignment, because it kind of keeps people on their toes and maybe like, I don't know what's going to be going on next year. And so we want to create some stability in a world of chaos. And you can do that in your having these kind of ongoing tried and true objectives. Where I think there is change every year is those initiatives of how to achieve the objective. That tends to be kind of what changes, at least in our organization. Even the key results or the targets will change, often increasing. Sometimes they become more granular. We might just be really trying to move a particular segment, maybe of our customer base, or pursue a new marketing channel, and therefore there's a collection of initiatives around that. So that's almost more of the like how. So if I think of the objective as the what are we doing, those key results and the initiatives are how specifically are we going to achieve that? So because of this, we do admittedly spend a lot more time in the planning phase, ironing out those key initiatives that support those long-standing objectives. For us last year, it was really all about expanding into new creative service categories, from voiceover to audio production. So let's call that a like a lateral or a service category expansion, which is a common vector of growth for businesses. For some other ones, it might be geographic expansion. This year, we're kind of just dialing it back and actually saying that we're going to be looking more at some internal optimization improvements. You could have a whole year focused on pricing. So, I mean, there's definitely themes that emerge throughout that. So we definitely use OKRs, I think, is the takeaway there. And that they're done so, and kind of the objective part of it is really set at the beginning of that strategic planning process, and then kind of filling in those gaps with more details as we refine the plan.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is the biggest benefit that you see of using OKRs in the strategic planning process?
Yeah, well, but perhaps I'm stating the obvious here. I think the biggest benefit is the whole team is aligned in terms of corporate direction, but it also serves as a decision-making matrix. It goes back to all these decisions that we need to make every day. What is that kind of source of truth of directionally where are we going and how are we measuring our success? So the vision and mission will tell you directionally where you're going. Your values in an organization will determine kind of how you behave, the rules of operating, if you will. And then the OKRs are actually will further refine the decision making, almost like more practically on a day-to-day basis. So individually, it does provide the direction on how much time we should spend on a project, maybe even which projects to prioritize, which, if any, customer feedback should be escalated. So because if you're really honed in on a particular key result that you want to deliver, and that's communicated out time and time again, we talked about communication earlier, on a monthly basis, if not more frequently, kind of in the right venues, then I think it actually signals, I think, to the entire organization that we are walking the walk, that when we say we want to move our net promoter score as an example, and we are talking about stories. We have a team meeting called the huddle, and we have a section in this huddle that is dedicated to customer impact, and we're trying to reinforce these stories that we have a positive impact on the lives of our customers. And sometimes, and these are often the same people who are advocates or promoters out there as well too. So I do my best to try to tie these all together. So yeah, those are some of the benefits. They're going to ground you. They're going to give you alignment, and help you make a better decision and really reinforce your convictions on the direction of your business.
Yeah, definitely some good benefits there, especially with alignment being the key one. With the move to remote and hybrid working, and I know that you're in your office at the moment, you see your nice office, and not all of your team are. I know when we spoke previously, some are at home and some are in the office, and it's definitely a hybrid way that you work at the moment. What effect has this had on your strategic planning, if any, at all?
Yeah, well, there's definitely been some pros and cons. The pros, all of the pre-work that needs to be done has actually been quite efficient. So, we don't just say, date on the calendar, show up kind of empty-handed. There's an expectation that you're coming with those initial market findings or other observations, customer stories, anecdotes. We're coming with that information prepared and packaged up. Even sometimes could be a presentation, it could be a single data, like a report. But all of that I found in a remote environment has actually been quite efficient. Desktop research, having time for some deep thinking, all of that's gone over really well, while working remote or at home, because people have time to sit down and think about their ideas. Maybe even put them into a spreadsheet, if you will. The cons, I would say, are the long virtual sessions. Those have been really challenging on people's attention spans, myself included. I think just sitting in a chair is one thing, but then staring at a screen, I think has been challenged. We've come up with some ways to overcome this. I mean, we've had some in-person sessions for those big kind of half-day meetings when pandemic restrictions have permitted. And then the other kind of check-ins, the 1 hour kind of here and there, or, just quickly running through the pre-work of what's expected. That might be 15 minutes, half an hour. Those, of course, can all be done virtually. But we've been able to talk through the corporate objectives, and refine those over sometimes a series of smaller meetings, as opposed to the one moment of truth where it all kind of comes together. But I'd say, virtual, strategic planning in a virtual environment, at least my observation, it just doesn't have the same momentum as being an in-person. Everything from just technological kind of glitches and Wi-Fi not working and having to share presentations, it's just not quite as smooth. So we do, make the effort to minimize those hindrances, but more importantly, we make the effort to encourage people to come together so we can have those healthy debates. We can kind of go back and forth and kind of read body language and get a feel for what the sense is in the room, kind of the words that are unspoken as much they're spoken. That is going to happen much better being in person.
Yeah, definitely. I think an honest answer on the remote hybrid situation. I don't think I'll be surprised if there's anyone listening that hasn't felt Zoom fatigue over the past 2 years or so. But it sounds like you found a good workaround, and hopefully now we can benefit from everyone sort of being back together again. I wanted to ask you, I guess, a sort of lasting point for our listeners. For those who are listening that maybe have some difficulty in aligning their strategy, can you give some pointers or some words of advice?
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind is, we're on a journey, and therefore, first I would advise to commit to the time. I'd block off times in people's calendars for everyone, if it's the leadership team or anybody else that's going to be attending, to those crucial planning meetings early on. And we're early on in the year. If you're even thinking about next year, you can get that time in the calendar before vacation starts cropping up, before other, other initiatives or, encroach on the calendar. Book them all in advance. There might be 4 or 5 sessions, but if you get them in advance, then it's very clear what the expectation is. If you're in leadership, it's your responsibility to be consistently looking ahead and planning this. So that would be my first word of advice. The next one would be, actually, if you can, there is a tremendous benefit to having a facilitator who's outside your organization. If the struggle is around alignment and maybe there's differences of opinion or perhaps 2 different views of the direction that the organization should or could go in, by having a facilitator, they can serve as that neutral party and actually guide the conversation forward. So I think we've worked with facilitators for years. We also, I think, have developed really strong and respectful relationships on our executive team, where our VP of People and Operations actually is the facilitator. The only downside, although we try to make a point to overcome, is that then she is unable to participate. It's kind of like she has to keep switching which hat she's wearing, but most of the time she's the facilitator. And it does keep the conversation going, just so we don't spend a half day or an hour even on a particular topic when there's a pretty healthy agenda. So committing to the time, working with a facilitator or appointing a facilitator who's going to keep it moving. And then I would suggest that during those sessions that there's really 3 almost like modes of operating. And it's kind of our same 3 rules, three kinds of meetings: discuss, debate, and decide. So I call it the 3 Ds of every meeting. And know what phase you're in. Is this just a discussion, in which case it's going to be much more free flowing? Some of the sessions will be debating, in which case you're purposely looking at both sides of an issue. And then there is a time for decision. Now, when it comes to that decision, to create the alignment that we all want, we need to debate and then decide and then unify. So even if there's tension initially and some misalignment, we want to make sure that as leaders, we're walking out of that strategic planning session unified and coming out to the rest of the organization on a consistent front, to the point where we agree, we have the same language, we know the same key initiatives, the same set of priorities for the next year. And lastly, the best way to kind of make sure that that is absolutely crystal clear is just to put it all in writing. Even if it boils down to a 20 or 30 page document or slideshow, it doesn't need to be hundreds of pages, but it kind of the executive summary could even be 5 pages. You'll have it all in one place. It'll be a unified resource for the company to go back to and reference. I like to use presentations in Google Slides or PowerPoint because you can repurpose those slides. And for future training sessions, the quarterly check-ins, any town halls. And I just think slides are a little bit more visually appealing, and it actually turns into a reusable artifact for other members in the organization. So that's where we put all of our strategic plan in writing. And as I say, I think that makes sure that we're all crystal clear on the direction of the company. Thanks,
David. I think there's definitely some good words of advice there. I think planning, looking ahead, but not only that, but sticking and committing to the time is really important. And I think the facilitator aspect as well, I think that's something for anyone listening to look into that option. It's been really interesting to hear how Voices conduct their strategic planning process. So thank you for talking to us today. And thank you to our Giant Talk listeners for joining another episode of Giant Talk. As always, we'd love to hear feedback from you. If there's anything that you'd like to find out more about or listen to on our podcast, please do get in touch with us at growth@therebegiants.com. Once again, thank you, David, and we'll be back soon.
Thanks, Carly.